What's going on, everyone? This is Mitch from RespectMyRegion.com, back with another episode of the North American Weed Tour podcast. We're looking at the best in legal cannabis across the map. Today, I'm joined by special guests from the Cannigma. I got Elana, Goldberg, and Codi Peterson. How are you guys doing today?
Doing great, thanks.
Fantastic.
Happy to be back.
Yeah. It's morning here in Southern California, but I know it's evening for Elana. We're on the same schedule because I just finished a night shift at the hospital.
Yeah, we're working with different time zones. I know, Codi, that's got to make it unique for you guys working together, where you, at least while you're stateside, different time zone, you got a little bit different schedule than most people over here. So that probably makes collaboration a little bit easier.
Yeah, at first I thought it was going to be a problem, but it turns out that it actually works quite well with our way our schedules work. Me being at the hospital and Elana running the ship at the Cannigma. When she's like wrapping up her work day, I can like chime in and we can have our meetings sort of that 5 p.m. hour.
And then we also have team members in India and on the East Coast and in Denver. Is she in Denver? Yeah, in Colorado. And what other time zone did we have that we were playing with the other day? Oh, and sometimes Rochester. I'm in Australia, which makes it even more complicated as well.
Right, and Rochester, East Coast. So we really cover the globe.
Yeah, so there's like a nice kind of like 3-hour window that we have where we can get the whole team onto a meeting, and otherwise it's all just like, team collaboration tools all the way.
That's so unique, and that's something I know, Elana. Every time we've ever done a podcast or been on a Zoom call, it's always end of one of our days, start of the other day. It's either it's always funny. You're in the email, you're like, my cutoff is this time, or I could do this time in the evening. And again, it depends on where you're at in the world, because I know I spoke to you when you've been in Australia, and I know I spoke to you when you're home in Israel. Well, I guess both are home at this point, right?
Yeah. No, this is home in Israel. But it's, I don't know, it's going back to visit where I grew up. So I guess it's another home. You're right. But it's not like I split my time these days. But it's always fun to have the calls where like I've got my whiskey and you've got your coffee.
And no judgment. If it was morning and you got the whiskey, sometimes.
Oh yeah, well Cody does that, but he's coming off night shift.
Yeah, I'm post shift.
Well, right. I start every episode off with our guest origin story around cannabis. I've had Elana on here before, so I've she's been broken in on this question. But Codi, you're first time caller, man. So just curious when you and your journey started with cannabis, whether that's personal, professional, whatever you feel vulnerable in sharing, or you can discuss both, man. I'm definitely curious, kind of when you and cannabis started your relationship.
Yeah, I love that origin story. I like that. It's really like playing into the comic book vibe. I'm the heroine in the story. So I guess cannabis would actually be the hero in this story. So I was in pharmacy school. I had never, I tried cannabis once as I was in high school, and it wasn't something that stuck with me. And I wasn't much of a drinker either. Kind of went to college, was figuring things out. And found cannabis and found that it worked well. It's sort of in my lifestyle and on the weekends, but I wouldn't call myself a medical user at that time, or at least not conscious of any medical use. Likely I was self-medicating some anxiety and things that had sort of reared themselves under the stressors of pharmacy school. But aside from that, what happened is a loved one, technically a loved one of the woman I was dating, was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer and was terminally ill. They tried all the medicine. They tried chemo. They gave up. The woman was nearing the end of her life. She had been given morphine and Ativan and atropine, standard medications to help people pass into this next world. But to be honest, as a pharmacist now looking at these medicines, they are mediocre, blunt tools that are sort of just pushing us towards the light and not a very bright way. And so what we did is I just so happened to be at that time had realized that I knew how to make brownies, and if you were at Duquesne and getting brownies at that time, it's quite possible my kitchen had touched those. But at the same time, my girlfriend had said, "Hey, could we, make a cake for Granny?" She said she'd be interested in trying. So we made the cake. The family went over. They sort of celebrated. Granny had her own cake, but just had the best night with the family, shared stories of childhood, was far more awake, needed no pain medicine. And this only happened twice before she passed away. This was the last 2 or 3 days of her life, but she was laughing with her children. she was, you know, sharing stories with her childhood. And now this is compared to days earlier where she was zonked out. And I've seen this numerous times as a cannabis practitioner where people have opted to use cannabinoids instead of morphine and narcotics, or just waiting until we really need the morphine, until we need to take that step, and using cannabis as that in-between can go so far into improving patients' quality of life and even extending life, if by nothing more than improving appetite. So that's sort of my story. I found that cannabis is medicine. And then what happened is I left that thought behind and I went and practiced pediatric pharmacy. But it turns out that it crept in because in children, FDA has already approved numerous cannabinoids for the application, the medical application in children, both for epilepsy and also for cancer. So there was already this sort of like, oh, I do dispense cannabinoids, and I didn't forget about Mary Jane. She was still a friend of mine as we went to Phoenix, Arizona, where I began my practice as a pediatric pharmacist, and then eventually moved to California. Heard about this new program that was offering a master's degree at a school of pharmacy in cannabis science. And so I'm now a graduate of that program. I have my master's in medical cannabis science and therapeutics, as well as my PharmD, my doctor of pharmacy. And I'm trying to tell the world about the utility of cannabis as medicine, but also as recreation and as a harm reduction strategy and all of the other beautiful things it can do. And the negatives too, because we have to tell the full story. And that's me. My origin story. Dr. Codi.
And then we found each other on LinkedIn.
We need, we need some sort of music though. I need like a.
I don't got the drum machine queued
now
up.
Now the theme song cued. Come on,
Mitch.
Sorry. I love that, but you're right. I decided 2 years ago. I'd gotten off social media. I wasn't doing anything to this effect, and this really plays to kind of what you've done, Mitch, in sort of like building your own brand. Is I just decided to get on social media and start sharing and, you know, just my thoughts. And then all of a sudden I started making content of my own because I happened to like Canva. And then Elana and Matan noticed this and said, hey, you should come be one of our experts. And now I've sort of become the leader of that expert team and sort of driving the science editorial at the Cannigma.
Awesome.
Thanks for the reminder. You're like, hey, you're here with the Cannigma.
Not all about you, Codi.
You said origin story. I got excited.
No, that's perfect. And thank you for sharing. You know, I like asking that because I feel like it breaks the stigma, but it also, I'm just a very big proponent. We're in the cannabis industry. In order to just normalize that, we have to talk about the root of it, whether that's going to be the basis of the rest of our conversation, which, hint it will be, or not. You know, I think this is the industry, and at the end of the day, the plant is why we're all here. It doesn't matter what you do. If you're in this industry, you put food on the table, or the basis of what you're here is down to that plant and people's relationship with that plant. And so I just always love to explore the nuances and the various stories that we all have connected to this plant. And they don't differentiate too much from too many people, but I think it's important now that we're in this day and age where we can share, where we can stream live on fucking LinkedIn and talk about using cannabis back when it was illegal. Because back in the day, you know, community was so important. It's how we found cannabis. It's how we shared cannabis, but it also was like very guarded and very protective. And so moving into this new era, let's let the fucking guard down, man. That's
absolutely. Yes. This is part of it. This is where, as a pharmacist, I was very conservative in this space, and now I talk to physicians every chance I get them. Why don't you know about the endocannabinoid system? Cannabis is, less harmful than alcohol. Look at what this fentanyl did to this patient. I don't think I've ever seen a patient go weed like this. Like, I'll do it all the time because I'm just trying to tell people, like, look, we have to start thinking about this in a more reasonable way. This is the new era. It's here, good and bad. I didn't mean to cut you off, Elana, but I think it's really an exciting time to be in cannabis, and we all share in this immense passion. So that origin story is important.
You didn't cut me up, but I was going to add that I think the same is true on the, whether we call it, personally, I think pretty much all cannabis use is therapeutic in some way, like you were saying before, Codi, that you were unknowingly treating anxiety or sleep disorders or social anxiety, whatever it was. But I think it's equally important to be educating when we're talking about, let's say there is a such thing as recreational use. When we're talking about recreational use as well, whether it's normalizing through our own, like being, you know, relatively normalized members of society, who run companies and have children and, you know, exercise and eat healthy and consume cannabis. And like giving, like, you know, I don't necessarily like tell, you know, non-physicians, why don't you know about the endocannabinoid system? But I do think that's also very interesting information for anyone to know, to understand, okay, there's a system in the human body that this plant is interacting with. I think that's really across the board, regardless of the audience.
Yeah, and you know, one of the things that, you know, Elana, we've talked about this on air, off air before. One of the things I like about the Cannigma is obviously the educational aspect. You guys do a ton of content. As someone that produces content, I have an intimate just respect for anyone else in that space, and the pros and cons, the ups, the downs of just doing, you know, participating in that. You know, I'm definitely, my life is very much intertwined around that. But you know, one of the things that you guys do really well is do a fact-based, a scientific or research-backed approach to producing content. But, you know, and it's more than just summarizing, you know, some section of about us on there, because I'm probably going to end up saying that, some form of that right now. But you guys put it in a much more consumable format for the consumer. Like we were talking about right before we started about like the best way to put out a joint was one of the pieces of content you guys did. And it's like, you know, there is some fact around that of how to do it without, you know, taking out the integrity of a joint and preserving the flavor. But it's just interesting to have content down to like that level. That's kind of surface level. You know, in terms of education, it's not the highest level of education, right? To some of the other stuff you guys do, talking about the endocannabinoid system and terpenes and some of these things that are much more complex and difficult. But I feel like you guys do a good job of putting that down into common speak. So I'm kind of curious. I'll start with you, Elana, and then we'll break it down to the doctor below us. But just what is the approach of like what content you want to discuss? And then from that point is like, where do you go in terms of like finding the information you need to kind of back, you know, the hypothesis or whatever content that you're trying to publish on the internet?
So I think really, I mean, there's two parts to this question. The first part relates to like you said, some sort of summary of the About Us page. It is really the process that we develop for content creation. And it's a very rigorous process, long and timely and expensive process of creating our content that has many stages. And the first stage comes down to whatever kind of research or like ideation needs to be done to come up with a topic. And that's always collaborative, whether it's coming from the SEO perspective. And when I say from the SEO perspective, what I mean there is understanding what questions people are answering and understanding where we have, you know, something to say. Like I don't believe in, you know, answering things if it's not our place, if we don't have something original or you know, credible to add to the conversation. And also where we have a chance of getting in front of those people. So that's like the technicalities of the kind of SEO strategies is understanding like where's our low hanging fruit and then what are the big guns that we're going to like, you know, for example, we're probably never going to rank #1. Well, not in the next year, let's say, for what is CBD. And yet, obviously, we need a very in-depth article on the site, which is like something of a hub. You know, I would say probably 90% of our content ends up shooting back to that what is CBD article. So even though we're not going to rank #1, that was essential from like an editorial perspective for us to have that. So whatever kind of angle it's coming from, it might be ideas from our scientific advisors, ideas from our editorial staff. We kind of bring those all together. And then we come to the point of making a brief. There's generally like at least 2 or 3 people touching any brief that we create. So there's, you know, someone coming in from the editorial perspective, probably someone from that like marketing perspective, whether we're thinking of this as content which is going to go particularly well on social or particularly well on SEO. We have the relevant players in there. And then, of course, Codi and his team bringing in the scientific side. And that's where we get to the second part of your question, which is like, how do you gather it all together and work out what we have to say? And listen, sometimes we do have clinical research that we can be basing it on. Sometimes we have some anecdotal evidence. And a lot of the time we have only one of those two or neither. And we still have to work out, okay, so what can we say, you know? One example that I really liked that we worked on, and I was very hesitant about tackling this topic, was CBD bath bombs. Okay, so we were like, this is, you know, it's a gimmick. Let's assume that it's a gimmick, but people are searching for this, people are buying them, people are trying to understand how to like analyze whether this is a good product or not. And we can have something to say about that. So we looked into bathing in general and the therapeutic benefits that can potentially come from just taking a bath without putting any bath bomb, let alone a CBD bath bomb in your bath. Then we looked at bath bombs. What can we say about the salts? What can we say about different, parabens, different chemicals that you don't want to have in anything that you're putting on your body? We can say something about that. And so far, nothing I've said here has anything to do with cannabis. But yet we were able to take this like kind of evidence indicated science-based approach that we work with and apply it to this topic. And so when it came down to it, at the end, it was like, listen, like maybe it does something, probably not. But if you are going to try one of these products, definitely, try one of these. We were able to find, I think, only 3 or 4 products on the market that we could recommend. So try one of these ones and definitely look for something that does not contain these ingredients and preferably something that you can get a COA for. And so we were able to use that whole editorial process without, obviously, there's no clinical research on the effectiveness of CBD bath bombs.
Pharma hasn't studied that yet.
Yeah, we're not getting to that. I'm sure someone will pay, $50 million at some point to fund that. Anyway, so that's the brief stage, right? Everyone comes together on that. Then we find the right writer to work on it. When I first started this, I was sure I'd been working with journalists, with writers across Israel and the world for years. I had a full Rolodeck of writers. I was like, I've got writers, I'll bring them in. They'll learn how to write about weed. It's fine. It didn't work. The content was, just like unusable. And I understood that I needed to be working with science writers and preferably cannabis science writers. And so we've now built, I now have a similar size Rolodeck of those specific cannabis writers. And we really, Codi and I often spend a lot of time talking about who is the right person to be writing this, and then to pair them with the appropriate reviewer from Codi's team to be able to work on the content from both ends, like from the briefing stage and then the review stage afterwards. So when the content's written, it then has a 3-stage review afterwards. Codi looks at it from let's call it a cannabis science perspective. I look at it from an editorial perspective. And then whatever advisor's working on it looks at it from the specialist perspective. And you can imagine what those documents look like after, we're done at them. They're absolute mess. And this is kind of the magic, really. I think this is the secret sauce that ends up with this content that does have that level of credibility to anyone who reads it, to the lay reader for sure, but also for people in the industry, for healthcare professionals, there's a stamp of credibility and authority on this content, which I believe shines through the content itself, but there's something to be said for that name. I think probably Codi can add to that from the advisor team perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you laid out the process really in depth. So I think where our content goes from really good and well thought out to exceptional is when we really go through a rigorous review process, really trying to nail down what you're finding on Google. The biggest issue with it in cannabis, it's sure, it's credibility, but more so it's that it's sort of copycatted. We see a lot of articles pulling from other articles written without resource or without citation. And what that can lead to is a misconstruing of what the truth is and what's really known versus what is sort of anecdotally applied and sort of not. And that's okay. Anecdote matters, people experience matters, but we want to answer people's questions in a way that isn't a copycat way, in a way that is really thoughtful about what are people truly trying to understand with this question and what can we actually give them that is actionable, even if it's not fact-based. And if it's not based in fact, we try to say that. We're there is no evidence, or there is extremely little evidence to support this claim. But if you want to chew on black peppercorn after you're too high, we see very little risk. And maybe it'll help because there's a little bit of the pharmacology that might make a little bit of sense. And so
I think that's true for cannabis in general, that line you just said. So if you want to try cannabis and see if it works, we see very little risk. That's the bottom line of pretty much everything on the site. Except if you're talking about the regulation pages, don't necessarily use it in some of the countries we've been covering lately.
And, we've spoke about this previously, Elana, of Israel's where you reside has obviously been on the forefront of cannabis research. The government there has been, I don't know what the right word is, welcoming or at least allowing the research of cannabis. Whereas you look at the United States, our federal government has a couple obstacles in the way. But Codi, as you expressed earlier in your origin story, you have a degree in cannabis science that was offered here in this country. And so for yourself, when looking for, information, studies, facts, scientific information, how much of that is coming, stateside versus global, and where do you kind of see from someone that's really in the trenches on that side? Who is Israel, really the leader from a third party from the clouds where I just think is, or are they the leader of that, and in addition to that, where else are you looking for information? Like where does it come from geographically?
Totally. So what we've seen in the last 10 years is a exponential growth of the amount of articles. 10 to 15 years ago, there was about 1,000 or less articles relating to cannabis or endocannabinoid system. Now there's 15,000 a year. So we're rapidly growing. And think about it, you can't read all those articles. So there's a very much an accumulation of knowledge right now going on. Now, we do have a little bit of this sort of knowledge sharing and repeating going on in the science as well, but I'll sort of set that aside. There is a tremendous amount of information being published in open source journals and things, but it comes from the entire globe. If you want to know my number one pick, my favorite, I love when things are coming out of Italy right now. They did big money into their hemp research program. There's some really cool PhDs doing some really awesome stuff. My science crush, Dr. Vincenzo De Marzo, is over in Italy. Someday I'm going to meet this guy, and I'm going to have to fess up to calling him my science crush, which is going to be good.
Well, now you've said it live.
Oh, no. Anyway, moving on. Awkward. Okay. What I was saying is Italy's putting out some really amazing science, especially on the endocannabinoid system, is what I nerd out on. But really, if you think about it, that's where Israel started. Well, I guess not really. Dr. Meshulam first started with THC and CBD, and then to the endocannabinoid system. And Israel remains a huge hub of cannabis research, but it hasn't remained sort of this sort of beacon of the only place doing research. And what we're seeing is the rest of the world really come online with a lot of theirs. Of course, there's still amazing things being done. Dr. Dedi Miri's work comes to mind, trying to really unfold this cannabis cancer story. But what I think is really important to note is, especially here in the United States, there's a lot of hope that for the first time since the 1970s, we now are able to have cannabis grown, used in research that's not coming from the National Institute of Drug Abuse, NIDA, who's got a clear slant towards, prohibiting their whole namesake as an organization is to prevent drug abuse, right? It's not to promote a healthy cannabis market. It's not even just to protect consumers. It's to prevent abuse, right? And so it just inherently, when we see government organizations with sort of a charter, they can tend to lose sort of the right sort of, focal point, in my opinion. So I think we're coming a long way, and there are at least 4 DEA approved places where we can grow actual dank and let people smoke it for research instead of providing them with 8% THC that's been rolled into a marijuana cigarette and kept in a fridge for 3 years. And it was, mediocre at best already. Now, there's a lot of great research that has come out of that lab. I don't mean to totally crap on this program, especially Dr. El Souli, who is a phenomenal, very famous researcher from this university. It's just the way the federal government structured the program. It led to a problematic situation, and we are breaking out of that, and we're going to see a lot more science research in the United States. And we've seen it. Italy research, the first research that found THCP in 2020. We wrote an article on the Cannigma. You can read more about this molecule. This is a longer chain, stronger acting version of THC, more psychoactive, found in itsy-beatsy amounts in Italian hemp for the first time in 2020. Researchers were very interested in this molecule. And what US scientists have done, mostly through Vireo Health is the company, MSO, who funded this research. They went in and they looked at a bunch of American cultivars. They looked at 4 different strains grown around the US, some skunk and whatnot. And when I have to look at the study, but they were well-known varieties. And when they looked, they found teensy-beansy amounts of this THCP that was just only discovered in 2020. And now all of a sudden it changes this idea oh, maybe it's not just the terpenes. Maybe this THCP is available in some of these varieties and could be contributing to it. Now, we have a lot to still work out around that hypothesis, but this was very clearly floated by the researchers in Italy who first discovered it. They're hey, this could be a clue. And we continue to find more clues to suggest it's not just THC and terpenes, that there's a lot going on to this plant. Ratios with CBD, cannabinoid acids, other minor cannabinoids, that the CBG that could be in the flower depending on when you harvest, right? Go into amber versus cloudy versus clear. That's chemical differences. That's different medicine. And leaning towards one or the other could certainly make a difference. Now we need to research more about what that means, both in the flower, because we haven't really validated this very well, the hazy versus the amber. And then we also need to take and find research around what's that going to do to the person.
Yeah, and it's unique, right? Like as the industry first rolled out, right, there was the big talk just on the basic level, you know, going into dispensary, there's your indica sativa hybrid, and then there's been this recent push the last few years talking about, let's stop talking about that, let's talk about terpenes now that we know a little bit more. And Cody, you're breaking it down to me that it's potentially, and I mean it most likely goes even deeper than that. And so, you know, are we going to see in a couple of years where people like, yeah, terpenes are important, but there's some other stuff that we need to start educating on as well?
I think it's going to be both of those things. I think absolutely we're learning more about the science of this, and people want to lean a little bit too much on the exact way weed makes them feel and that variety. But there's a lot going on here. This endocannabinoid system of ours is the most intricate and complex system in our bodies. It changes throughout the day. It's intertwined with your stress hormones called cortisol. It's tied to testosterone and estrogen. So a woman's menstrual cycle ties into the way cannabis affects them. The time of day you smoke weed, it changes the way it makes you feel, right? And so like trying to be like, this variety, it's the myrcene in this one. That's absolutely why it made me feel different. That one time I tried it is really kind of a difficult thing. Do I think consumers can pick up on these nuances? Sure. I'm not as good as some consumers for sure. But I will say there's a complex system this plant is engaging with, and a host of different bioactives like terpenes and cannabinoids and minor cannabinoids. So just, you know, saying it's this terpene that messes me up, I think is probably a bit too reductionist.
Yeah.
I feel like I would add in there as well that there's a really encouraging trend in the industry towards moving away from this kind of like real product specific naming at all, and instead looking at sensation based naming. And I think this is a move in the right direction. It's like grouping products together as energizing, focusing, relaxing, sedating, creative, whatever it is. And then people can understand that there's like a variety of different effects in the product, which I think is like the first thing, is that it's not just up or down. I mean, it's great if we at least understand that there are different types of cannabis that can cause those sativa and indica effects. But actually, it's much more broad than that. And I think what's useful for consumers at this point is to be able to know that they're like choosing something from within one of these like loose buckets. And like, yeah, cool, they're not necessarily going to nail it and feel exactly like something else they chose from that bucket. But it's like a kind of, I think, more like usage or intention based direction for the categorization. I like that.
Yeah. Totally. And I think,
go ahead.
No, so where I wanted to drive it is like building on that. I think what we've sort of done in cannabis, especially like sort of like this sort of high THC market, is we've really pigeonholed ourselves into looking only at the terpenes, because the cannabinoids are up there. It's already 25, 30%. Like, how much different can it be, right? So now all you have is this terpene profile to examine. That's the only other piece of information you might have. But if we considered more ratios, if we looked more at CBG and blends and cannabinoids, there's a lot more that cannabis has to offer. You know, THC is a fantastic molecule, right? But it's, again, sort of does all the things, right? That's why you can't really avoid the side effects with getting the good. Like, you kind of get the whole bag because it stimulates this CB1 receptor in our brains really strong. But if we give THC alongside CBD, we have very good evidence in humans, right, with real weed in multiple places around the world that show that there is a altering effect, a sealing effect that's created when CBD is added in a 1-to-1 or a 2-to-1 ratio. Interestingly, and this we haven't talked about this much on the site, I want to do an article on it, is very small amounts of CBD, so let's say like 20-to-1 THC with just a hair of CBD, has actually been found to enhance the psychoactivity and the intoxicating effects of THC. And, you know, this is not something that's talked about in the industry, but there's numerous clinical studies that looked at this, including even using injectable THC and CBD that evaluated this.
Well, that's a good way to understand what it's like to smoke a type 2 joint.
Well, for what it's worth, the most two similar routes of administration, the most similar route of administration to injecting
would be
smoking. So these are very, when you look pharmacologically at these two, other than the change of the molecules in the smoke, like smokenol, the difference is not that substantial.
It's so
this is
unique.
Why we have Codi.
Everyone needs a pharmacologist.
You know, that's what I'm saying. You know, I sit around smoke and I'm like, oh, I think this, and then guys like Codi, you know, come through and you know, break it down, the hows, the whys, the whats, you know, and the wheres, which is very much appreciated. And it's like the important thing of this industry, right? This industry is so infant, and even beyond the industry through prohibition, right, has limited not just, again, what we were talking about, even not just the research, but the discussion, just the open discussion of cannabis and what we can learn from one another about sharing our experiences and just learning from that, right? And Elana, I like what you said, you know, about this effects-based, experience-based approach to marketing and grouping projects. You know, some people love it, some people hate it. Everyone has their opinions on everything. I mean, some people love the indica sativa hybrid. Some people are like, we got to kill this. It's done. It's old. I mean, everyone has their opinions either way. I'm personally all for whatever, like you said, Elana, like whether it's 100% accurate or not, it starts people's mind of thinking towards the possibilities or the applications. And that's like, the consumers are down here and the industry echo chambers here. There's still so much further to go, but in order to pull these people up, they're not going to get, you know, if Codi's talking to another, you know, doctor or scientist, right? The average consumer is going to tune out. They're going to be like, bro, you've lost me. I don't want any more of that. It's not necessarily dumbing it down, but just starting on the basics of like, let's explore this concept, whether it's 100% accurate in all cases or not, right? And I think that's one of the important parts of educational content in this space. So whether people have an opinion one way or another, I'm for anything that's furthering the discussion, furthering the self-exploration. And you mentioned earlier, like an SEO perspective of content, right? Of looking at it. And it's not, some people out there, marketers might think, yeah, you want the most traffic. But from your guys' standpoint, right, you're really looking at like, if people search this question so much, sure, it's great. Search volume is going to bring people to the site, but it's also, this is a big question that a ton of people are asking. And most likely, if they're continually asking that, there's not getting that information maybe at scale, right? It's not being spoken about. So what's your approach in terms of looking at SEO from that perspective of like, these are questions that people have. Let's go answer these questions.
Look, we'll take all the traffic as well, right? I'm still happy to, you know, pick the right topics and you know, enjoy watching those numbers go up. But I think really oftentimes the question is like, you know, is there search volume now? I don't have good data, and I'm sure a lot of people listening know this. Like the data we get on cannabis terms is not good. It's definitely not accurate from any of the tools. I've seen it time and time again. I remember seeing that there were like 400 searches a month for cannabis and liver, and we were seeing at least 10,000 people coming every month to this article on those keywords. So like we know the data is not correct, but we use it as, you know, it's an indication, and it's the best we've got for now. And this is actually something that we repeat over and over again in my content on the site as well, is it's not a perfect system, but it's the best we've got for now, you know? So we like pull everything together, and this is like, go to the dispensary with this. It's not a sure thing, but anyway, so back to the SEO strategy. I think it's about understanding, you know, obviously, first of all, like you said, what questions are people answering? Do we have a good answer for them? And a third question that I often ask there is there already a good answer to that out there? Because I feel like, you know, from kind of a mission perspective, what I want to do is counter the misinformation. And if, to be perfectly honest, I go there and there's a really good article from Project CBD on the topic that we're looking at, I feel like it's not as urgent. Like we'll get to it, and if it's a really central topic, we're going to cover it as well, like I mentioned before with the, you know, the CBD kind of pillar article that we have on the site. But a lot of times it's like, well, I feel like it's more of a service to cannabis consumers if there's only bad information, if there's only, you know, for example, when you look up Rick Simpson oil and you see a whole lot of crap, it was really important for us to tackle this topic, even though we weren't going to say the same thing as the rest of the articles up there, we were going to say, okay, this is what, this is what the method prescribes. This is the history. This is what we don't know. There's a lot we don't know. This hasn't been proven. And we went, through all of it. And there, I think it was really necessary for us to get that content out there. So I do think there's like a number of considerations that comes into that topic selection. We're not beneath picking topics that we believe are going to bring in big chunks of traffic or deciding to lean into areas. Like, I did not think we were going to have, if you would have asked me 2 years ago, I would not have told you that we would have this flourishing cooking and recipes section on the website that we'll be focusing on it. Like the first half of this year, we really leaned into the cooking content because we saw that was what we're working with. This is like, people were asking these questions. More and more people are exploring edibles and they want to know how to do it. They're kind of just like messing around in the kitchen with whatever they can find online or whatever they think they can know because they already know how to bake. And so I guess we're kind of like fluid with that as well, seeing what's working, where we can like add to the conversation. Cody's dying to jump in.
Yeah, well, no, I want it because I don't want your point to get lost. Is like Mitch really asked, like, well, what are you doing, like, about what questions people are asking? It's not always like, there's not always an answer, and sometimes we think the answer is stupid. We're like, okay, well, you can cut the end of the joint off, you can put it, like, there's a million ways to put out a joint, right? But the truth is, like you said, people are asking the question, and sometimes we're like afraid to talk about a topic. We're like, oh, it's kind of like contentious, right? Like something about cannabinoid hyperemesis or whatever it might be. But we need to lean into these topics because these are the questions that people really have that don't have a good place to lean to, that don't have somewhere where a pharmacist or a cultivation expert has really reviewed what is the content, what is the facts, and what is really still unknown and sort of you can trust. And people have that option when you think about like other medicine and other health things, right, at WebMD, and really we're trying to provide this other reliable service, except around cannabis, because you know as well as I do, you Google a question, you can find yourself anywhere related to cannabis. It could be NIDA's website, it could be Mayo Clinic, or it could be, a seed company.
WikiLeaks.
Yeah, wherever. It could be, there's a million places you could land first page of Google, and people don't have that one place they can go to trust. So, I would recommend to anyone who's streaming live, like whenever you have a cannabis question, just follow that Google search with the term Cannigma and you'll get some quality reviewed articles.
Absolutely. I mean, I think you guys have built, obviously you discussed earlier in this, the process, right? If you're putting content out that follows that sort of process, that is much more in depth than our process for content. Obviously, we're not putting out things with as much, backing and stuff where I feel the need to cross-reference things to that level. But I mean, I just think a rigorous process like that is going to put out and the level that you guys want to stand on, right? You guys are you have a purpose and why you exist, and you're going to meet that expectation, right? And if not, you're going to see a lot of people challenge that. And I haven't really seen that. I've seen a lot of people kind of pay you guys respect for the angle, the lane that you guys have taken in this industry, not just content distribution, but in this industry. I think a lot of people, myself included, respect that. And again, as someone that puts content out, I have a high level of respect for what you guys do, because a lot goes into it. A lot more goes into it than what I do for content. So, I'll pay
different
homage
topics
there
as well.
Yeah, but don't sweat. You can just read our articles, direct people to us, and they can find the peer-reviewed science that we've cited. So, that's why we break it down at a level where anyone like a Mitch or a Joey can find it and then distribute it to the masses who are coming to your website.
Absolutely. So, what is it? We could talk all day. For people that know, before we went live, we were chatting for a while. This conversation, I could honestly probably run this conversation for another hour, but in being mindful of everyone's time, I want to start rounding up towards the ending. But what do you guys have coming up next? I know, Elana, you guys threw an event at MJ BizCon last year. I don't know if you want to talk about what you guys are planning on doing again this year. I assume that we're going to see you in person again, stateside in Vegas, coming up here in November. Just curious, what else you guys have on the horizon for 2022 and beyond?
Yeah, so we're both going to be in Vegas in November. Given that I'm over here, we kind of like pick one, big horse. We picked MJ BizCon again this year, so we'll definitely see you there. We're planning a really small kind of private event this time together with Chef Jordan Wagman. We're doing an infused event with infused hors d'oeuvres and cocktails. It's going to be an alcohol-free event. It's like a kind of friends and family in the industry type event. We're going to be creating a lot of content at the event as well. That's, always the core for us. So like I said before, there was a big focus in the first half of the year on culinary content. So we're going to be getting a whole lot of video footage of those dishes and cocktails being created. And then our other big focus for the rest of this year is our cultivation guide. We're creating, we actually earlier this year did a cookbook. Happy to share the links if anyone wants to check it out. It's just a free downloadable. We're doing a kind of something similar, working together with our advisors from the kind of botanical and cultivation side to create. It's going to be like a 75-page document, kind of taking you through everything you need to know for your first grow. But it's going to be useful for kind of anyone who's growing at home. So that's a big focus for us. Going to be launching just before Christmas. And yeah, that's like, I really believe in, like, obviously, like, we have our day-to-day of running the publication that's a non-stop, and those are the two kind of focuses for us till the end of the year.
I'm super keen on the cultivation guide. One of our the science experts that we've sort of cultivated a team, Stephen Philpott Jr. He's a environmental biologist, marine veteran, and just an all-around like brilliant science communicator. And he's going to sort of do an intro on just plants, like not cannabis, like not leading with like popping your seeds, like no, this is plants, like life. And we're really just excited to do some pictures and do some graphics around the 10 things that plants need to exist.
Oh, and another cool thing we're doing, you reminded me, Codi, is Cody's going to start doing a regular Q&A with one of our advisors. So we're going to just do like, the usual streaming on all channels. We're going to be doing this next week, Codi, right?
Correct. This will be, actually, no, it's this week, the 22nd at 12 noon Pacific time, if anyone's listening live.
So you'll find it on any of our channels. And that's just going to be, an opportunity to kind of explore all of these different areas of specialty that we have kind of behind you. Everything we've been talking about the past half hour, basically, like the faces behind all of that content. So we're really looking forward to getting that up and running as well.
Yeah, we work with some really bright people, and I want to get them in front of the Cannigma audience, because I think that's 100% to offer and shared, even beyond what they've reviewed and written for us. It's really incredible the group of people that have sort of amassed to help support what is the Cannigma. So I'm very thankful to be part of it. And I can't wait for the next thing. I will see what we do next. Beyond the cultivation guide and some of these tools we're working on. Trying to get you an edibles calculator, y'all. I got to finish it.
We've got it ready to publish. We got a few final
touches. I got to do some math.
That's going to be cool. There's going to be a tool before Christmas as well.
Absolutely.
His calculator.
Oh, I look forward to that. I look forward to a lot of that stuff, man. I really appreciate you guys coming on here. And again, I really appreciate the work you guys do, even outside of coming on here, just the work that you guys do for people out there that want to learn, find more information, Cannigma.com, or like Codi suggested earlier, if you have a cannabis question and you Google it, just add Cannigma at the end of, what is this? Add Cannigma at the end of that search query, and, they've likely covered it. And if they haven't, shoot them an email and say, hey, can you cover this? I'm looking for a trusted resource, But again, Codi, Elana, really appreciate you guys coming on here, and look forward to catching up in person in Vegas here in a couple months.
Yeah, see you then.
Thanks for having us. Party. You're the man, Mesh. Thanks. Appreciate it.
Awesome. This is the North American Weed Tour podcast. We're looking at the best in legal cannabis. We'll be back, I think, later today. I think we have a couple episodes of content, so stay tuned on our channels for a couple other live streams. And as always, we're dumping content out every day on Respect.